Hello, you're listening to Wait, How Do You Spell That? A Rare Disease podcast. My name is Bree, and I am the Senior Director of Patient Worthy. Thank you so much for joining me. Our guest today is the one and only Brenda Snow. Brenda was diagnosed with MS almost 3 decades ago, and after years of struggling as a patient to be believed or even taken seriously, she decided to take all of that experience and her ingrained entrepreneurial spirit to create a place for other patients with rare and chronic conditions to use their own stories to change the life sciences industry. Brenda is the founder and CEO of Snow Companies, the first patient engagement company in the business. Brenda started the company in 2001 from her attic and turned it into a very successful industry groundbreaker, pioneering the way the industry talks about and talks with patients and caregivers. Brenda was twice named one of the 100 most inspiring people in the pharmaceutical industry by Pharma Voice magazine, and Snow Companies has won over 200 industry awards, including PM 360's Trailblazer Agency of the Year and the Association of Marketing and Communication Professionals Marcom Award. And Snow has received recognition from numerous NGOs worldwide. Brenda, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Bree. It's great to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you.
You're my first one.
Oh,
yeah, you're my first one on this big book tour.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm so excited. That is such an honor. And it's
well,
really
it's an honor for me. I'm very appreciative.
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's so perfect for me because even though I've been with Patient Worthy now for many, many years, this is my first time hosting our podcast.
And I'm usually on the other side of the mic. So it's my first time as a guest.
Perfect. It's absolutely perfect because not only is this your first time and my first time, but you are the reason I am involved in patient advocacy. So this is just one of those full circle moments for us, for sure.
Well, maybe we'll all have goosebumps.
I already do. So for me, this is a wonderful honor to have you.
Thank you.
And to be able to talk to you today, especially because of what we're talking about. So as I mentioned in the introduction, you've been working as a patient and caregiver advocate for almost 3 decades now with Snow Companies, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're talking about something totally different.
Could it be this?
It might be just that. This is unbelievable and so exciting for me to introduce to the world today this very, very amazing feat of yours. And I don't want to take away your magic here. So please tell everybody who is listening, what are we talking about?
Well, thank you. And again, great to be here. I'm honored. And for all of the Patient Worthy community, you do hold a very special, near, dear place in my heart. So thank you for listening today to my personal journey as a patient, as a caregiver. There's people in my life I've caregived for, as an entrepreneur, and now a best-selling author, which is sort of mind-blowing. So last week on March 18th of 2025, I released my first book called Diagnosed. Thank you. The Essential Guide to Navigating the Patient's Journey. It was maybe kind of one of the hardest things I've done in some ways. It was certainly cathartic. It was frustrating, but it was a labor of love. And really, at the end of the day, I hope the book can be a vehicle for people that start on their own journey. It's the book that I wish that I had had. When you hear the words, you have MS, or you have HER2 positive breast cancer, or you have lymphoma, any type of cancer, these are life-shattering, I call it an identity earthquake in the book. I mean, these are major altercations for the way your life is going to be for the rest of your life, and the people around you and the people that love you. So I wrote the book in hopes that, and it may not be for everybody, but for those that it can help, if it's just one person, then I met and achieve the goal.
That's
So
wonderful. That's
yeah,
amazing.
thank you.
Well, before we I'm so excited to talk to you about the book, but
Right.
before we kind of get into the details, I just want to mention just some little things, no big deal, right?
Okay.
Since your release, just exactly 1 week ago, the book is now the #1 new release bestseller on Amazon in the doctor-patient relations category. It is the #1 ebook right now as well, and #3 in hardcover.
Yeah. Wow.
Brenda,
Right.
I mean, first of all, to say congratulations doesn't even begin to
Thank you.
express how overwhelmingly incredible
Thank you.
it is.
Overwhelming is a good word.
I bet it is. I bet it
Yeah.
is. As the reader, it feels that way. So I can imagine. Knowing you personally and knowing you for many years at this point, I still cannot understand how that must feel. How does it feel, Brenda, to be a best-selling author?
It feels surreal, actually, and very joyful and vulnerable, a bit scary, actually. I'm somebody that has kind of spent the last, well, a long time. I don't want to date myself, right? But a really long time caring for other people greatly. And so, of course, you want the book to be well received, right? And you want it to be meaningful for people. But with that comes a lot of vulnerability, because, of course, there's going to be somebody that says, it's not for me. But, you kind of keep those voices out of your head. So I've just tried to really lean into the positivity, that it can be a hopeful tool, a bit surreal, and at the end of the day, I just think really happy. It's been a really great week. The feedback has been amazing, and I think some of the things that have stood out is just the volume of people that have contacted me. I get a little weepy, on my phone, text, or on LinkedIn, or on Instagram, or ringing me to talk. And in some cases, time marches on, but they've never left my heart. And just reconnecting with people that, were so important and pivotal in my journey, and to know what, I meant to them, has been really remarkable. It's been, so I guess surreal and all the other things I said. See, and I had to bring tissue. I think it's also been emotional in the most lovely of ways. To love and be loved is a very special thing, and everybody deserves it. And I just actually think the world would be a much better place if we could all embrace that. So long-winded answer to it feels great. It feels great.
I bet. And I can imagine it's such an interesting, you put so much work and effort and, like you said, frustration, a lot of obstacles to put all this together. And you put so much into it that maybe isn't feeling the best when you have to revisit those moments or work really hard or late into the night or that sort of thing. But when you put so much love and effort into the world, it always comes back, right?
I'd like to think so.
And I think that's just what a lovely thing for you to experience at this time, as you're kind of in you're in the weeds right now.
Early phases. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And to get that love back, I mean, it's obviously well deserved, but it is a reaction to the love that you put out there. So
thank you.
I just got to ask though, Brenda, I mean, you've been at this for a very long time, right? Yep. You've built this incredible company, several companies, one of which I work for and love very much. And you've done so much in your career. What were you thinking?
Well, so great question, and a few things. So during sort of the real active professional years, growth years of business, 9 times out of 10, after, I would have interactions with patients literally all over the world, Asia, Australia, Europe, United States. Always somebody would say to me, your story's so incredible, you should write a book. And I thought, great idea. but I don't have time, right? I was doing other things. And to be fair, I might be a reasonable talker. I can write fairly well, but the idea of sitting down and writing a book was daunting. And really, I want to give, a shout out here to Greta Myers, who was, I give her credit with the book, who was this incredible goddess that helped me do this, because I did not know where to start. But when COVID came, all of a sudden, I had this time in my life that I could be transformative about me. I think I had spent so much of my time building businesses and helping others and in philanthropy and business, that when we had a lockdown, I was like, wow, what am I going to do with this time? So the book percolated to the top. It's probably a great time to try to tackle the book. Also, my own personal health. You live on the road for 25 years and it can take a toll on you. And so I was very much the practice what you preach, because hypocrisy won't serve you well. So I decided to do those two things. And it took me kind of a long time to write the book. I don't know what the typical time frame is, but I'd say it was 2.5 years. It's very conversational. It's not a highbrow intellectual book. It's written like I talk. That's because I talked a lot of the book and then went back and wrote the book. And I also suffer, for those that know me, a little bit of control issues and perfectionism. Shame. So I was never happy. And of course, there's still things I like to go back and redo or change. But at 2+ years, I said, I have to be done. I need to send this to the publisher. And then sent it to the publisher. And then sort of like 9 months went by. I mean, publishers do all kinds of things, layout and editing. And I just sort of forgot it. And then, after they get the book into fulfillment houses and SKUs and all these things, they were like, your release date's going to be March 18th. And then it became a reality. And then I think that's when that vulnerability crept back in. So, it is a daunting task, but it was one where I learned a lot. And I think it's important to do that with most tasks in life, right? I didn't know how to start a business either. I had been sick in a hospital on and off for 3 years straight, blind, crippled, couldn't walk, lost my job. I mean, on and on and on. It wasn't like I knew how to do that. But I think when you surround yourself with the right people, I had an incredible business partner in Corbin Wood. I've had, wonderful team members, and I'm open. And I think that's what I would tell patients that are listening to this. When you hear the words, you have this, it's horrible. It's really one of the worst days of your life. But I want people to know that they can have hope. And, hope is so powerful. It's something that I've pondered about for decades, and that you have choices. And if you look at your life and circle the wagons, with the right kind of people and whatever that endeavor is, and make choices, baby steps. You're not going to solve it all today. You're not. It takes a long time. I'm still working on it 30 years into my diagnosis, right? So making those choices, getting with the right healthcare team, making sure that you're being managed appropriately. What kind of other, philosophies do you need to put into your life? What are you filling your brain with your reading? Are you taking a daily walk if you can, or at least getting outside to see fresh air and the sun? And, finding the joy in the little things. Don't ever underestimate the power of that. There was a time that I did, but those are the things that kind of make life worth living. And then I think it's easier to go through these stages in the book. And I know you have some questions. We'll talk about that, because ultimately what I want people to know is that from the lowest point, when you hear you have condition X, you are really able to have a life of purpose, to have a life of impact, and to make a difference in the lives of others, and most importantly, yourself, because you deserve it. Everybody deserves that, 100%.
So talking about the book, it's obviously about your diagnosis, right? And you share a lot in there about your own journey, your own experiences, how you learn to live with it, and how to become successful kind of despite it, right?
Yeah.
But the book isn't a memoir, is it?
No, very good. I was waiting to get that soundbite in there. Yes, it is not a memoir.
Tell us a little bit about that, because you could have easily written your story.
Well, apparently I have 2 more books in me, I've been told, but I don't know. This was hard.
Is this exclusive
if I wrote
information?
my story, there's already enough dirty words in my book. If I wrote my story, I'm afraid it could be censored. So my memoir, or people will have to die first before
it would be X'd out. Yeah,
before my memoir. But
I get it.
yeah, no, it's like I said, I guess it would fall into that self-help category. The roadmap, like I said, the roadmap that I wish that I had had. But to make it relatable, I think there's power, in sharing bits of my stories, but most importantly, which is really great, there's other people's stories and nuggets in here. Care partners, loved ones, other patients who, you know who you are out there. Thank you for letting me put them in the book. But, it adds that credibility, because they know, and so that's why I wanted to share parts of my perspective and my personal journey that is more memoir-esque, and others, because it's, what is that saying? You don't know until you walk in somebody else's shoes. Or I guess in my case, I wasn't really walking in my shoes, but so yeah. So I think it makes it more relatable when somebody's saying you should do this and you should do this and you should do this. Well, when it's wrapped with people that have been there, people that have tried it, people that know, I think it adds a level of comfort for the reader. Or another way to make that connection, because, I'm all about storytelling. I'm all about making a connection, being connected to yourself, and in turn, being connected to others. And so I think adding these memoir-esque nuggets pull through the tips and tricks and the ideas, if you will, to architect that life of meaning and impact.
Well, and I also think, I have to say, I don't think you define your success as the money you've made, the businesses you've built, the opportunities financially and career-wise that you have gained. You identify success as living happily and confidently and in control of your own being and self.
I do. That is right. Yeah, I
absolutely.
do. Very much so. And, the philanthropy piece of this, I intimately understand both sides. If you read the book, there was a time that I was, 6 figures in debt and had absolutely no way out. And honestly, early on, if I didn't have a family that could pay the rent, me and my daughter would have been homeless. And I remember I got to a point where there was still an instrumental, tens and tens and tens of thousands of medical bills. And it's, like I said, it's in the book. And I asked my dad to pay them. And he said, "You're resourceful." It's always the Snow mantra. You're a Snow, and be positive. And he said, "You'll figure it out." And at the time I was kind of like, well, geez, haven't I figured out enough already? But it was really a gift, because it was just another way to spur me on to ultimately take care of myself. And, I have been fortunate, but the piece that you said, that is not how I'm motivated. I was never motivated that way. And now I spend a lot of my time looking at how I can give the financial piece away. The philanthropy that I do, that my family is involved in, is of the utmost importance to me. It is the second chapter of my life, so to speak. I've said it on every vehicle, but the proceeds that I receive from this book will all be donated to health related charities. And again, if you can't give back, not only, with my wallet, but with my time, it means so much to me. I've got some really nice engagements coming up too, pro bono, that I'm going to go out and just talk with people, meet with people, hug people, cry with people. That's the stuff that turns me on.
And that's really great. You mentioned to give your time. I think that is really important.
You have to.
Because that's all we have.
Yeah, you got to get your hands dirty.
Right. And that's when it comes down to it, that's all we have is our time. So how you choose to spend it is what is important. And I think that's what's so fascinating and just really impressive about you in this book is that you're not saying in there, go to work, get down on your knees and go to work every day. And then maybe you'll be successful. That's not what you're doing. What you're doing is you're saying, redefine your happiness, redefine your goals, redefine your life, because that is what is important.
And in some cases, there's been, work. I think about a woman in the book, a very high powered attorney. She had just been a federal judge, and bam, she gets diagnosed. And, every milestone, law school, the top firm going, and it's all pulled out from underneath her. So that's like, what do I do now? Right. So she did end up getting back to work and going back to work. It just needed to be different so that she could take care of herself. So that's an important part, right? But it just needed to be different with her limitations. So I think that is worth doing, is the introspection to say, okay, this is a big detour. This is not what I planned on at all. But it doesn't mean that you're not deserving of a new road, a new avenue, a new way forward. And if you're stuck and you don't know what that is, I mean, people can get a hold of me through my website, brendasnow.com. I'm happy to take a phone call and help people, through kind of that moment. Lots of nonprofits and NGOs have social services that they offer complimentary, where somebody might be able to talk you through that. There's life coaches, there's career counselors in communities. So, where there's a will, there is a way. Now, something kind of loaded about that sentence is, when you're sick, the will is tough, right? So I had zero energy to do any of what I'm talking about the first couple of years that I was diagnosed, which is why I spend a lot of time talking about how you get the people that love you as your little army during this initial stage. Because listen, I was too wiped to even pick up the phone, let alone cognitively track what the hell I was supposed to do next. So I don't want to give anybody the impression that, hey, you get, your diagnosis of cancer and, you're on the phone making everything perfect for the next 20 years. It's not that. And it's cyclical, right? So I've had MS 30 years. What I go through today with MS is very different than I did 25 years ago, but it doesn't mean that I still don't go through stuff, right? So you always have to retool, rejigger, reimagine, fine tune, whatever words you want to use. And, if I can expand here, I even broke the book into kind of two sections. So the front end of the book, like putting out the fire, I call it, that's what I think is the very common emotional toll that a diagnosis takes on people. So the pre-diagnosis phase, the diagnosis phase, the grief, the acceptance, the loss, all of these things. And then, you sort of get to that fork in the road that I talked about. I was thinking of perhaps reading some things here. I'll do that in a minute. Right. But the second part of the book is, the good life for the rest of your life. So this is what I'm referring to: endurance, optimizing your relationships, optimizing your care. You need to do that for the duration. I have a disease that has no cure. Most of this book is written for chronic, rare, and in some cases terminal. All right. This isn't nothing against high cholesterol, but you can take a statin and pretty much you're good to go. This is for that other patient population where they have to think about having this stuff. I was going to use another word, but try not to swear on the podcast today.
I appreciate that.
I know. So for the rest of your life. So my endurance phase, it's not like I tick the box. It's constant. It's absolutely constant. It might be different today, and it is, than it was 10 years ago, but you have to kind of go back and reevaluate it. So the book is even written in a way where there's some repetition, because if you want to just open up a chapter to, rebuilding your life, don't want to read the front pages, you can consume that chapter if that's sort of, where you feel you're at, without having to talk about maybe the emotions of grief you had 30 years ago because you've worked through it. So those are sort of like the way the book is constructed to really highlight that patient journey, but to remember it's just not completely linear,
Right. And what I love so much about the book too, in that regard, is that you bring your message in so many different ways, right? It's not a step one, step two, like you mentioned. You tell your story. You tell other people's stories. You give these quick little 1 or 2 liners that are just little, points of reference. You provide detailed advice. You provide summaries at the end of each chapter. I mean,
did I mention control?
But I think what is really important about that, understanding the patient population the way that I do, but also just understanding all people, is that what I think is really great is you recognize that everybody needs the message, however they need to receive it. And not everybody is going to be able, to your point, not everybody's going to be able to check it off their list, right? Yep. They may need those little one-liners to remind them. And that's what's great. They can go to your book, they can look up the chapter and get that little piece of advice that says, don't quit, or whatever it says in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully provides them comfort to, I think even the pull through quote that the publisher wanted is, you are not alone. And, you hear it, it's everywhere. So I don't want it to make it trivial, but you feel very alone, when you get one of these diseases. It's, even if you intellectually know that you're not, this doesn't always talk to this, right? And so you feel very alone. Everything that up until that point is just gone. And there is just that moment of deep panic, deep frustration. And also I want to say here, for the care partners specifically too, of little children, oh God, those are some of the most gut-wrenching stories I heard over the years, because the child is so innocent and they can't comprehend more of these adult feelings and concepts. And, in this situation, the care partners having to do absolutely everything to keep their child, alive in some cases, and then has the most intense emotional burden and a feeling of being alone, and also just really no time to even process these thoughts. And so trying to get connected, to places that you can get that nugget of hope, or that you can feel not alone, is just so key. Because if you don't, I've seen too many endings where people become extremely depressed, very isolated, give up on life. And, nobody deserves that. Like, full stop, nobody deserves that. And so if anybody's feeling that way, call me. I will give you a big pep talk, because that is just the number one thing. I don't want to see people suffer.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Talking about caregivers, you talk a lot about caregivers in this book. And I think that's a really, really important thing to talk about, because it's easy to dismiss a caregiver in this process. And what you do so well in the book is that you not only discuss for the patient themselves why you need your caregiver, but why also you need to take care of your caregiver. And also you actually speak to the caregiver to say, you need to also consider yourself in this process, and you need to also take care of yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your own experiences as a caregiver, with caregivers, and why it was so important for you to include this?
Sure. Headline: my family's sick of me. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, the caregiver piece is, I think, twofold. One, yes, of course, in my own life, in my own experiences, but I had, I think, the most honored, privileged position of just almost anybody in the world of getting to meet literally hundreds of thousands of people in my career, hundreds of thousands of patients and their families. And I really tried to take notice of the dynamics of the families that I thought, wow, I would like to emulate that. That's really working. And the situations where I had deep empathy, because you could tell things were struggling, maybe broken beyond repair. And the one thing that always stood out to me is the people that love you, that are your people, and they're in your circle, they'll do anything for you. But at some point, caregiving at that level of intensity can almost become like its own chronic illness. And so if the caregiver doesn't take time for themselves, with no guilt from the patient, us patients can't be saying, well, you don't love me. Why aren't you doing this anymore? What do you mean you want to go out with the boys or hang out with, you have to zip it and you have to give permission to your caregiver to have a bit of a life that isn't about caring for you. Because oftentimes what happens is their hopes and dreams and wants as an individual, everybody has their own intrinsic goals and motivations, right? And when you become a caregiver, those kind of get put on the back burner and your persons become yours. So now you have this very interesting dichotomy, right? And guilt. Well, which one is more important? Taking care of my loved one or me? And so you as the patient need to help the people that love you, that are in your care circle, know that it's okay to take a time out from you, to have a moment, to do things that bring them joy. And they might not be things you can do anymore. And here's the other thing. Maybe they were things that you even did together as a couple or a family, and your disease, makes it such that you're not able to participate in that capacity. They still need to. And as a team, you need to find one together. What is that new activity or that new thing that you can do together as a family, as a couple, as sisters, whatever it might be, that defines your bond in a new way, that brings everybody joy and takes some of that pressure off the constant thoughts of just being in caregiving mode. So I hope that shines a little bit of a perspective. That's my opinion. I'm sure other people have different thoughts too, but this is sort of the theme that has stood out to me the most.
Absolutely. And it's definitely the theme in the book. And I think it's why it makes the book so interesting and so different than something, anything else that we've read, is because it's not just saying, here's what you need to do for you. Here's what you need to do, which it does very clearly and in a lot of different, very helpful ways. But what it also does over and over again is it says, here's what you have to do for them. Here's what you have to do for your community. And this comes through very, very clearly in the advocacy aspect. So obviously advocacy is your bread and butter,
it's my
right?
jam.
I mean, exactly. This is not a secret to anybody, but what you do so well is you say, find your community. You need the support. You need the love. Find your community. But you also say, give to your community. They need your love. They need your support. And that's not always a message, right? And it's hard to receive that message, I think, too, as a patient sometimes when you're physically feeling ill, right? But it's very clear in your book. So can you tell us a little bit about that and why that is as important as and as defining as a patient to participate in your community?
Sure. Well, I have a couple of thoughts on this. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I will talk about how I got there in the book. But what I think is interesting that has kind of exploded since I've written the book, I was writing those pages in 2021, is all of the research and data that we have on longevity now. So I'm a big Peter Attia fan. He's an MD. And, you look at different markers for longevity. There's health, there's all kinds of things. But a really key one is a sense of community. Are you connected? So this transcends even having a chronic illness. This connectivity piece, this community piece, this being part of something bigger than yourself. We have data that it shows it enhances your life. So I think that's kind of pretty powerful. So for me, the community piece is multifaceted. So there's the part where, like we alluded to a little bit earlier, how you can get in and get your hands dirty and help. Maybe your jam is, I have a really good friend that's into helping supplying wells, water in Africa, go down and build a well, getting your hands dirty. That's what I mean by that. There's some people that have philanthropic financial gifts that they do every year. All of those feel good. But the sense of community that's very deep and very meaningful is putting yourself out there. Putting yourself out there. And I started this podcast by saying I had a sense of vulnerability with this book. Of course you feel vulnerable. Sometimes you don't know anybody. You're worried about being liked, being accepted, maybe physically, you've changed, you've lost your hair, you've been on medication that has side effects. It's affected your external appearance. All of those things are barriers. But by getting connected and building a community, not only will you expand, the support that you receive, but what you will find is that the joy that you get back is tenfold as to what you give. And you don't know what that may spark in you. So for me personally, I went to my first MS support group in 1994. And let me tell you, it was the most depressing thing. It was worse than being told I had MS. I don't think I even put this in the book. And I went in there and everybody was a downer. They were negative. It was self-hatred talk. There was zero hope in that room. And I left there. My dad had taken me, and I was shattered. I was 10 times worse. And I thought to myself at that point, so the spark that, as I started connecting the dots, was, how do we infuse like positivity and hope into these communities? Or where do I find one like that? Because I want joy in my life. I want to bring it to other people. And that's when I kept looking for all kinds of different groups to join. For some people, it might be their church communities. It might be their local disease support group. It might be a new moms group. It might be a geriatric group. I mean, there's a million, depending on where you're at. And when I went there and I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable and I started sharing my story, that is when the spark happened. So I went back to that depressing support group about a year and a half later and told my story of hope and inspiration. And for the first time, there were people in that room that, you could see a veil almost lift, a crack of a smile, tears. And I ultimately ended up facilitating that support group for a long time. and kind of change the way everybody in there thought about their chronic condition, in this case, MS. And that was sort of one of the ways the little seed got even planted for the business, was in the power of community, the power of one story making a difference, the power of you matter because you effing do matter. And I think that community building piece keeps growing, and the things that you will see blossom out of that, you may not see at the time, but it will be unreal. I promise you.
It's lovely. When you first started to tell that story, I thought, when you said you walked in that room and it was so depressing, I just thought, well,
actually, my dad pushed me in the room. I was in a wheelchair, but yes.
I just thought, no way did Brenda Snow just sit there and say nothing. And then you came back and said, I took over that group.
Of
and
course,
okay,
I had to have the last word. Jeez, the curse, I know. A blessing and a curse.
I think it's working pretty well for you, I have to say. But I do actually want to talk about that a little bit, about boldness, because there's a lot of very bold moments in this book. There are. And I want to say there's naughty words.
There are naughty words. To know me is to love me.
That's absolutely right. But there's also bold statements, right? You say things like anger is a gift, right? Or you say, who wants to bitch about everything? Better to have fun instead. And actually, at one point, you even question your own boldness a little bit when you're talking about intimacy by saying, did I really just go there? Yes, I did. You're welcome.
Yeah.
These values, right? This approach, right? I know you, so I know you're very direct, and you don't sugarcoat anything. You often use humor, right, to alleviate heavy things sometimes. So none of this surprises me. But I would imagine maybe a publisher or two maybe had some thoughts on this. So what I think is really great, though,
the hot seat now.
Yeah. But the truth is, this is authentically you.
It is. It's
this
authentic.
Is who you are.
The only way I am. It's the only way I will ever be. And that's why I said some people will like this and others will want to burn it, right? So,
correct. That might be true. That might be true.
It is what it is. But again, why should, if it's not true, to me, if it's not authentic to me, if it's not the best of what worked for me in here in the only way I know how to do it, then why sit down and even write it, right? I mean, and that actually, you're sparking my memory. I sat down at first thinking I was going to write a women's leadership book. That's what I first sat down to do. And it was not flowing. It was not coming. And as I pondered on, well, why isn't it? And what is it that you want to say? And, it was just really, and I knew I couldn't do the memoir yet. I thought, well, you know what? The only reason you became a woman leader is because you were a patient first. So you need to start at the beginning, Brenda, with the book you always wished that you had had. So when I decided to get real, of course I'm going to get real. I'm going to put in those absolute bold moments and hope that the reader, takes them with the spirit that it was intended, which is with, like you said, candor, humor. It is a way that I cope. It's not the way everybody copes, but it is the way that I cope. And with, probably some truth telling. For some years may be more sensitive than others, but what the hell, skip that page. But yes, some bold moments. So is there any specific bold moments? Let's address the anger one. So I believe that, and I've seen it more times than not, so I would say it's above average, that anger piece is really what drove people to action. And it's what drove me to action. So I wasn't in action in grief. I wasn't really in action in acceptance. You're just sort of trying to make all this stuff your own. And there's still a lot of that identity earthquake going on. You're wondering, what your mosaic is going to look like now, how you're putting all those pieces back together. And I think the anger phase is really like, you have to work through that because there's a lot of things that you're angry about. You're angry about the loss of your former self, your life, your job. I was treated absolutely horrible by the healthcare professional community. I do have a page in the book that says, this is not intended to batch HCPs by any stretch of the imagination, because many are my friends and I have an incredible medical team. But early on, I had terrible luck. So I was angry about the way that I had been treated and told that I needed to be committed to a mental institution. And, all of these things in my life, if I didn't work through that anger that I personally had and then own it, and it could be kind of in the rearview mirror, and then that anger to change things. It was only because I was like, I'm not going to tolerate getting canceled again on this insurance policy. I'm not going to tolerate again, seeing people get declined for disability Social Security benefits. I'm not going to see people treated like, not even a human in a healthcare setting situation. And so I think that anger really can spark action, with the caveat that it cannot be who you stay, right? You can't be just a pissed off person. But that anger, if it's channeled like a kind of a force of good, can be a very powerful motivator, is my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, and you mentioned this, it humanizes.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, to have written a book, to go in and say, oh yeah, it was sad, but I didn't, to say, no, I was angry.
Yeah.
And I chose to use my anger as a gift. I mean, I think that's something that the people understand, and it humanizes your situation. It humanizes you. You're not just telling people what to do.
Yeah.
You're telling people.
And it's okay to be angry at sometimes, right? You don't want it to, again, to define who you are and just that be your mojo, but, or the only vibe that you have, right? But it is okay to be angry. And again, that is one of these emotions you're going to see like this, There's still some times that I'm like, oh, yeah, and I get disgruntled and angry about a certain situation. However, 30 years in, I'm better equipped to be able to handle that. But yeah, I think if you call it what it is, hopefully the reader can say, okay, well, it's normal. There's nothing wrong with me because I'm, angry. How do I channel this for a better purpose? And then how do I cope with it and move through it? So some people can do that alone. Some people need therapy. Some people need medication. No right or wrong answer there. Just know it and advocate for yourself, because like I started this off, you deserve it.
And I think you touch on a lot of other different things in this book, obviously, that could be considered sensitive, right? You talk about intimacy, for example, and how that can complicate a person's life, a person's disease, a caregiver's role.
Right.
There's a lot of different aspects, that just being one. But tell us a little bit about how important it was to you to talk about the sensitive things, right? Because I can imagine there's a little pushback there from the professionals around you, but why was it important for you to, risk making people uncomfortable in some ways?
Yeah.
But to get the truth out or to be authentic?
Look, part of being human, right? We all feel things. We all feel things. We talk about all these emotions. I've got a million of them here in the book. But one of them that is normal for an adult person is the intimacy piece, right? So you want to be intimate with the person that you love. And chronic illness sometimes can change that for a variety of reasons, from side effects of medications to what's going on in here, right? Change of identity, insecurities about how maybe you feel or you look, Am I worthy? Will people still love me? So these are very intense emotions. And often I have found that when people had a lot kind of going on in here too, they felt embarrassed to talk about not feeling sexy, not feeling like they could enter into this intimate relationship with their partner. And again, remember, some of that relationships has changed a little bit too, right? Because everybody's been caregiving. So I think sometimes the patient is left feeling not like an equal anymore. Sometimes it feels like, and so you have to talk about it so that you get your footing back. So you can say, I am a part of this dynamic. I have normal wants and needs. How do we work on this piece together? For some people, it might be as simple as starting off, holding hands again, a gentle kiss. For other people, it's how to go back and have sex. Sometimes that might be different or difficult depending on what your disease is. But there's, if you can, again, here's that word, if you can be vulnerable, if you can put it out there. And I find that in life over the years, I think just tell them what you're going to tell them, right? Just be honest. And this fear of rejection, it's a tough one. It is so tough. But, I only know of just a handful of experiences of people, really, a handful of situations I heard about where there was massive rejection and those relationships ended and moved on. And guess what? Probably for the best, because I'm sure your needs weren't getting met in a lot of other areas too, right? Just besides the intimacy piece. So you have to be brave. You have to, sort of speak up, say, and, here's a strategy that, I've shared with a lot of people and I've gotten feedback that it works, just to say, I'm afraid to talk to you about this, but I need to. And can you just hear me out, no judgment, and hold my hand while I tell you where I'm at? Because I'm really scared to do this. That, if the other person on the other end with that opener can't listen and understand you, again, I would argue they're probably not somebody that are worth having in your life anyways. So look for those little opportunities to open the door. Now, let's transition, not just the intimacy piece, the sex piece, but even like daily living stuff. I've seen so many partnerships fail because people couldn't communicate or be real about how does the division of labor look in the house anymore? Who's doing what? Who's cooking? Who's cleaning? Who's paying the bills? And there were some things that I could not do in my very acute phase, but the things that I could do, I tried to keep those on so I could feel like a valuable part of that team, right? So I could be a contributor to the team. And I think then it makes the harder conversations easier to have when you are actively participating in some role in that partnership.
Yeah, again, so just that same theme of like, where do you participate as well?
Yeah. And, and like I said, speak up and, in your role playing is good. You're right. I use humor. I can't help it.
It's, the sound bites are, they are perfect.
But no, really, have a moment to yourself and say, how am I going to say this? How do I want to open up this conversation? What am I comfortable with? And I find that if you can start with, I'm nervous to say this, but I need to, pretty soon you're not going to need to say, I'm nervous to say this anymore. Pretty soon you're going to say, hey, guess what I'm thinking? And then you're cooking with gas.
And these are the great little bits that show up throughout this book over and over and over again. It's these very real, very honest points that you provide throughout the book to say things like, just exactly like that. Here's a quick way to turn everything around.
Yeah. I'm a what you see, what you get.
That's for sure. I can attest to that for sure. Two things you keep mentioning, and I really want to bring up, I think they're very important. The two words that come up in this book over and over and have come up in this conversation: communication and
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Communication is all over this book. It's
Mm-hmm.
in every chapter. It is
Mm-hmm.
all over the importance of being able to communicate. You've made a career out of communicating your story,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also, what I recognize is that you recognize it's not easy for everybody,
No.
right? It's
No.
not. And we're just talking a lot about that, about why it's so important. Um, but that it goes very much hand in hand with the vulnerability piece,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
Um, Again, you have made a career out of being vulnerable. I wonder though, writing this book, what was that like for you to have to relive in this way, relive your experiences in this way,
Mm-hmm.
but do it in a way so that you allow your sadness, you allow the feelings, but you take those feelings and you turn them into guidance for somebody else.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So I think that's the other reason I couldn't write the book till now, you know, um, because, 10 years in, I maybe hadn't experienced enough yet or practiced some of this stuff enough to be able to synthesize it in a way that hopefully it could be helpful to somebody. Um, so I think that it's no coincidence that organically, yes, I had the time during COVID, but I think that I felt it was the right time. And I tell this story, and for those that know me, uh, as I started sharing my story and my journey about what it meant to live with a chronic illness and would give, a lot of the stuff in this book to people all over the world. Usually my talk was, 30 minutes or something. And there's points that I always cried every time, every time. I mean, and, I have this memorized, I've given it tens of thousands of times. And I always cried. And I was like, why am I always like so emotional here? And then it was probably like 20 years. And I didn't cry one day at that point. And I was like, I went back and I reflected and I was like, oh, I don't think you cried today because you finally healed. You finally healed. So it takes a long time. It takes a long time. And that's why you have to give yourself grace. That's why you just have to be patient with yourself. Be grateful that you have the life that you have. And for those around you that stick with you, not everybody does. Sad fact. So I think that when I sat down to write the book, all of these things came out because I felt like they were ready to go on the page, and I could do it in a way that I could really think about what does this mean and what happens next, and then how did I feel after that, and what would I say to somebody looking back 30 years. So it was cathartic, it was great, but I was ready. And I think that's the most important thing, is that I was ready. And I don't think I probably would have been ready before then.
And how does it feel now that it's done? You mentioned maybe a little bit of little control issues there.
It
How does
feels
it
great.
feel?
I mean, it feels great. Look, there's a few things I'd love to change because that's just, it wouldn't be me. I wouldn't be Brenda if, I wasn't the crazy perfectionist that I am. But again, as I have, had more life underneath my feet, some of this stuff you just learn to let go of. So, and the fact is, nothing is perfect. And that's what makes life beautiful. That's the beauty in it all. Nothing is perfect. it's the bits on the edge that are the great stuff. So it just feels incredible. And I look down and I see my name on the jacket and just have a pinch me moment. And I think I think some of the things that that meant the most to me is just really seeing, like, sorry, my daughter's face. She paid a big emotional price. A lot of years of trauma for her when I was sick. And, she's the most wonderful, wonderful person and has such a happy, rich life. So, don't worry about screwing up your kids, everybody. They turn out okay. But that was really a full circle moment for me from going, the book opens. I mean, the book opens with this, the first sentence, chapter 1, the first sentence is, it's never a good moment when your 5-year-old asks, Mommy, are you going to die? And you don't know how to answer. That's tough. That's the moment where you blink back tears and think, what the hell is happening to me? So when this came out and, I dropped a box off to her house and had the privilege of, signing and writing one to her, I think that was probably sort of my best moment. In a way, it was my gift to her. So.
How lovely. How wonderful. What a gift. What a gift. Honestly.
and to know, a legacy piece a little bit. And that's the last chapter, impact. Every person, I really believe, I've said this before, might sound kind of silly, but I really believe that everybody that gets diagnosed with one of these insidious diseases gets it because they're like the best people ever. Really, like they're like the best people ever, right? And tap into that. You are. And what is the reason you got it? And building that life of impact and that legacy piece, it can be really, really simple. It doesn't have to be a book. But for me, it was like, it sort of bookended it, not to use a pun, but it was like, yeah, it was like, when I'm dead and gone, I want the Snow women to know that they come from strong, determined, adventurous, spontaneous, fun, and most of all, deeply loving, caring people. And that anything they choose to do in life, with or without a chronic illness, that these qualities, can transcend hardship if you're willing to work hard and stay positive and have a little bit of hope.
I love how in the book, pretty early on in the book, you mention something really interesting. You say illness doesn't discriminate. And you talk about, in a way, how you're grateful for your illness for a lot of reasons. One being that it has given you this opportunity to meet people all over the world who look different than you, who have a different life than you, but you share this one thing with. And without this one thing that has been, so debilitating in so many ways, you would have never met all these people. You probably would have never built this business that has employed so many people over the years, but also has given tens of thousands of patients and caregivers opportunities they never would have been provided. All because of this one thing. But what you choose to do is you choose to look at it as a gift.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, what a beautiful, incredible way to redefine your disease, right? I can't imagine that came easily. I can't imagine that was your immediate response when you were diagnosed. So how do you get from a chronic diagnosis to being able to say, what a gift I was given?
That's a great question. And, there really isn't an easy answer. I think sort of the first thing that I will say is I'm a little hardwired this way. I like a challenge, but that's not everybody's not hardwired like I am. So let me try to break it down to kind of maybe some thoughts and ideas around that. So I think you do have to, the front of the book goes over them, you do have to work through, I've got them right here, the pre-diagnosis, the diagnosis, the grief, the anger, the acceptance. You have to work kind of through those 6 pieces for you to even get close to a place of viewing what's happened to you or your family member as a superpower, a blessing, something that you're grateful for. With great challenge comes almost heroic responses. And, you can think about, in history, so many, heroic, I quote Ernest Shackleton in here, who was the captain of the Endurance, right? And was one of the Antarctica explorers of the Southern Hemisphere, and every tragedy that could happen to him in that expedition happened. And it was really, the power of positive thinking and resourcefulness and being prepared and not giving up and all of these things that led to that positive outcome. The same applies to you and your family when you are sick. And to view it as a blessing, I think you need to stop and take stock. So I've always journaled. I have a million little books. They're in my purse. They're in the suitcase. They're on my bedside. They're all over. And I always tried to be very present with, how did any of this seemingly disaster have a silver lining today? What was the one nugget that I gleaned from what's happened to me that I wouldn't have had this not happened to me? So when you start to get a list of things where you're like, wow, this is kind of powerful. And then I thought back to sort of my old life, before MS, and there was nothing on the list that looked like all of the blessings. I thought, okay, I'm reframing this and I'm really going to own this and lean into this as my superpower, because I became really just a better person all around. My capacity for giving, my capacity for caring, the kind of friend, how I showed up, partner, mother, even ultimately in business, I got better as I really leaned into saying, this is an actual blessing that happened to me, and I think it's just kind of always being present of this reframing piece. Very easy to say, I can't believe this happened to me. What did I do to deserve this? The reframe on this would be, of course, I'm not thrilled that this happened to me, but what is it that I'm supposed to take away and do with this? How is this going to benefit my life, other people's lives, and the people in my life? And when you can start to answer some of those questions and reframe those self-pity and negative feelings into something more optimistic and hopeful and positive, then it becomes who you are. It takes practice, but it becomes who you are, and you become happier ultimately. And then it's easier to do all these things.
Yeah, and what you do really well in the book is you draw those lines between all these different things, because that is important to say, I think, is that you're talking about how to handle a diagnosis specifically, but it's not just about your diagnosis.
No,
is it?
No, it's not. Well, and you become this incredible role model for those around you, and I didn't even realize it at the time, but I think that I modeled the behavior I want to see in others. So again, this didn't happen overnight. I mean, there's a million people that will tell you that knew me 30 years ago to think I'm an asshole. So, but at the end of the day,
I don't believe that.
but at the end of the day, I've really tried to embrace what is the life lesson that multiple sclerosis has taught me. What are those life lessons I've learned from literally some of the most amazing people that I just tingle all over when I think of them, and the example and the role model they were, and reframing those poisonous thoughts and not communicating. Talked about communication, those poisonous thoughts, first of all, to yourself, you deserve better, and to others, and kind of showing up in a way that then becomes habitual. And then it starts to be that, you get what you give.
Excellent. I just want to read a couple things to you really quick.
Okay.
Just at the risk of embarrassing you a little bit. I want to read some reviews of your book so far. Again, this has only been out for a week.
Yeah.
Right. A little over a week at this point. And some of the things that we are getting in, or some reviews. The Eloquent Rebellion, How One Woman Rewrote the Rules of Chronic Illness. Thank you. Thank you, Brenda, for such revelation and positive thinking, which is so lacking in this world. The book doesn't just inspire, it empowers. Brenda's wisdom is hard-earned, her words are raw yet uplifting, and her perspective is both deeply personal and universally relatable. How does it make you feel?
Oh, you can see. I'm just glad. I'm just glad it helps. Like I said, suffering is no fun. It's not. And I feel honored. I feel very grateful, humbled, and hope it can make an impact for the people that need it, because like I said, everybody deserves to have some joy and happiness in their life. And I say this a lot, it's not all going to be easy. I'm not Pollyanna. I'm not sitting here saying every day is going to be puppy dogs and roses. And, there's some days that are absolute crap, and I still have them too. But it makes me feel it's been my life's work. It's been the best ride you can possibly imagine, a labor of love. And to know that, it meant something to somebody is a gift that fills my heart till the day I die. I think, I'm going to read just a couple of pages. It's chapter 4, starts on page 81, about grief. And I think that's the universal. If I could say that there was one emotion that I'm pretty sure everybody would feel with the same magnitude, it would be that one. I mean, some people are less angry, more angry. Some people, accept things easier than others. Some people get a quick diagnosis and not, but I think the one thing out of, again, all my years of expertise is this grief piece. And it's the one that I think, even when you work through it and kind of come out on the other side, it can kind of creep back in. It's the one that knocks on the door more often than others. And I said also, well, when I sat down to write this, and I was talking with Greta too, this hope piece, for years in my own storytelling, I talk about how that spark of hope that I had, and it wasn't even at the time very big, like this, but I was hopeful I may walk again. I was hopeful I would live, to the age that I am now. But just such a small amount, but that little bit of hope is what made me feel that I had, the latitude to make a decision and some choices. And if I didn't have hope, I think I wouldn't have been a player in my own life, right? And so for me, grief is the universal thing, but this seed of hope you really need to listen to in this grief phrase. So I think a lot of people know who Yuval Harari is. He wrote a great book called Sapiens. And I loved in his book sort of how he described grief. So I start the chapter with a quote from him. So layers of loss and then hope. Hopelessness overtakes us when we are all alone, spinning hellish scenarios in our minds about which we cannot do anything. After all, how can we change something that doesn't really exist? But when we focus on reality, we almost always discover that there is something we can actually do to improve every situation. Every person has some power, and exercising our agency gives us hope. And he put it far more eloquently than I could ever. He's a really good writer. So, because hope can be very abstract, right? So now my words. It's grief that follows swift and hard after the diagnosis. In the grief stage, everything feels awful. But your story doesn't end here. The best way to get through this phase of the patient's journey is to make choices that reflect hope in your future and lead you to a better outcome. I love the quote by author Yuval Harari that I opened this chapter with, and then it's there again. Grief is inevitable, and it is appropriate and necessary to allow it to wash over you. The fastest way to get through this stage is to not fight it or try to stuff it down, but simply allow it to hit. And that's not easy. At times you may feel like you're drowning, but hope will be your life preserver. And I do mean that literally. This, you may never walk again, is the subheader here. This is confirming, along with your clinical examination, the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. When I heard my doctor say these words, I said, "Are you kidding me?" She shook her head, "No." "Am I going to be disabled for the rest of my life?" I asked, feeling panic rising. "Am I going to be able to walk again?" All the reading I had done about MS to that point had referred to it as the crippler of young adults. Don't let that be my story. Don't let me be young and crippled. My doctor took a breath. Your type of multiple sclerosis is likely relapsing remitting. There are currently no treatments available to address this other than symptom management. Historically, the natural progression of patients with MS is that they are ambulatory dependent, meaning they need an assistive device like a walker or a cane. She hesitated. Or they are no longer ambulatory at all within 10 to 12 years. You mean in 10 to 12 years, I'm going to be permanently stuck in this wheelchair? In 10 to 12 years, I'll never be able to walk again? She held my gaze. In 10 to 12 years, yes, you may no longer be able to walk. Of course, I began crying my head off. I kept saying, what is this going to mean for my life? How am I going to take care of my daughter? What am I going to do? Thinking of the implications of my disease made me feel completely emotionally paralyzed, just like my legs. So that's a little bit of the beginning of the grief chapter.
But it's another one of those very uncomfortable conversations, right? It's another very uncomfortable situations that I feel like you have to, Brenda, in order to help others, have to put your own out there, right?
It's hard because, you are mourning, so I don't know. I have not lost either of my parents yet, thankfully. I've lost a beloved grandmother. But from what I know, people that have lost a parent and a sibling, particularly a child, this mourning is, all encompassing for a long period of time. And I would say, again, not having experienced that magnitude, but for me, like the only thing that I could kind of relate it to the grief is mourning, because you are mourning the loss of yourself. And that's really heavy. You are mourning the loss of yourself because you ultimately will not be the same person that you were. Life's never going to be like it was. I wish I could tell you that it was, but it's not. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be bad. It doesn't mean that it's going to be awful. It doesn't mean that it's going to be terrible. It's just going to be different. And what the book tries to do is help you get from the mourning stage to how is your life going to be great but different, right? But you have deep feelings of grief, deep feelings of mourning, everything that you've lost. And for some people, the magnitude of what they lost is unbelievable. I consider myself lucky in some cases. Lost everything: job, home, car, finances, family, kids, spouse. It's sense of self, identity. It can really be a ripper. So you got to feel it, and then you got to take action. And, that's why I think this anger and grief sometimes really sort of the same sides of a coin, because as you kind of work through the grief piece, and I really do encourage people, if they are stuck there, get help. Help is out there. And move to a place of also self-forgiveness. You didn't do anything bad. This didn't happen to you because you're a terrible person, or what did you do to deserve this, or God hates you. It's like my initials, BS. So you didn't do anything to deserve this. You didn't do anything to deserve this, but you've got to get through the grief, and know that magnitude that I'm talking about of the grief, that will get better. But there'll be times that you still have sadness. There's times that I'm still sad. I can give you a time, 2 months ago, I did the trip of a lifetime. I got to go to Antarctica, a place that I always wanted to go to, right? And there were things that were on the trip that I was like, I don't know if it's a good day for me to go do that because of some of the limitations that I have on the left side of my body. So was I, thrilled about that? No. Was I sad about that? Yes. But I've learned how to own that piece. I've learned how to, be okay with my boundary setting. And it didn't change my experience. It didn't change me having the time of my life and doing all the things that I could do and that I wanted to be and be totally immersed in it. But again, this is 30 years in, and that was still sad, that, I'd gotten a cold. And when I get, like a lot of people that are immunocompromised, probably traveling that distance. So I got a cold. And when I got the cold, the left foot didn't work as well. And, trying to jump off a boat and into another little Zodiac and speed around, it just wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen. So of course I was sad. I was very disappointed, but it took the day and got better. And guess what? I could do it the next day or a couple of days later. So that's a great example of reframing too. Didn't beat myself up. It still had a wonderful time. So again, not completely linear, that you go through all these things and done and dusted, life is perfect, but allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to work through it, get the help you need. You have to communicate. You hear this all the time. The Brene Browns, she's fantastic. There's so many, there's just so many great people to listen to about the power of positive thinking and communication. But literally, I don't mean it to sound trite. I don't mean it to sound flippant, but people are not mind readers. If you do not communicate your needs, If you do not set your boundaries, if you don't tell people what you want, I've told this for years, you don't get what you don't ask for. So, you have to kind of work on being okay with sharing all these parts of yourself, whether it's from sex to I can't climb the mountain, or, I'm not doing all the laundry today, or just give me a hug. I need it today. I mean, just say it. It'll be freeing. Take it from an old woman.
I want to talk about the hope thing. I think that's really powerful, because so hope is a constant in your life, but you're a human being and it's hard to find sometimes. Can you give us some examples of when it's been really hard for you to find hope and where you had to go to get it?
Oh boy. Well, I think early on I had setback after setback. So for people that are listening to this or read the book, you have little wins and you really need to celebrate the little wins, right? And so I had little wins and then I had another setback, and then my MS got worse. I had a little win. I had another setback. And it just felt like every time I was making progress and was hopeful, some other thing happened to me that just, derailed absolutely everything. And there was a time that, I wanted to give up. There was a time that I very much wanted to give up. I would not say I was suicidal. Some people are, and you need to take that very seriously, and you need to reach out and get help immediately for that. And I have, information in the book, but I certainly I didn't care. I didn't give a shit. And I gave up on myself. And when you give up on yourself, there's no hope. There's no hope. And for me, I would like to tell you at that point in time, it was the things I do today, digging deep. I have the tools inside of me in the toolkit, but it was an external force. It was that my daughter needed me. And I thought, what is she going to do without a parent? I mean, I was a single mother. So it wasn't hope. It was necessity. But after I tried one more time, that ultimately led to my diagnosis. This is pre-diagnosis. That's kind of when I started to connect the dots about, she was my hope, right? So if I'd given up on her, then, I'd given up on myself, but I couldn't give up on her. And so then that sort of translated for me, well, what if I remain hopeful about some of the things in my life that I don't know yet? They have not unfolded. And I would say that to people, we don't have a crystal ball. You don't know what's going to unfold for you. Really, I think some probably pretty amazing things that you never expected. So I tried to be hopeful and say, well, if I do this, and this had a decent outcome. So I had hope for that and it kind of worked out. So what could be the next thing that I think about that would give me hope? There's one hope that I still have and it hasn't been realized. It's a hope for a cure. Most of these conditions that we're talking about today don't have any cures. There's no cures. There's some medications that maybe treat symptoms or slow progression of disease, but there still is no cure. So, that one's always in the back of my mind. I haven't given up hope for that. But for me, again, that's why, I donate to some research institutions and hope that we will find a cure for some of these, really yucky things. I think another way for people to have hope is to do things that are fun. And again, I don't want that to sound trivial, but I introduced my mother in this book and I call her the queen of fun. And if you think I'm a lot to handle, you should meet my mother, is what I say. Um, and she's always just sprinkled her little pixie dust of joy wherever she goes. And so I kind of tried to lean into the way she handled adversity. It just was one thing to move out of the way and kind of keep an eye on the target, and just with a smile on her face. I mean, really, sometimes as simple as that. So I've tried to look at her example again, modeling the behavior you want to see, and say, well, all right, what if I have people over and I want to create like a joyful moment in my house, but I'm too tired to do anything? Who cares? Like like I said, the perfectionist, will I have I had to cling on to a little bit and let it go. If you stop by at my house, I'm hopeful for a good time and we'll have fun. And my underwear could be on the floor, and I don't care. We can call for, I mean, there might be something to eat. There might be some, it doesn't matter. It's about, again, connection and being together and being happy and being hopeful for these moments that really, I think, are what makes life worth living. Right. So that would be one way to look at it. The other thing I would say is, find that piece of meaning for you. Things look a lot better and there's reason for hope when you're engaged with things that make you feel valued, give you validation, bring you a little bit of joy. It's much easier to remain hopeful under those circumstances. Yeah.
You bring like a lightness to it.
I think so.
I don't mean that in like it's not in like levity. It's like you bring this lightness to hope. The way you speak about hope, you bring this brightness to it. Honestly, you remind us that hope is not heavy. It's light, and it can be fun, and it's beautiful, and it's aspiring.
For me, it has been. Yeah, it's been the one thing I've hung my hat on.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing because I can see how hope can become heavy for some people when you're feeling the way you're feeling.
Yeah, and especially I think, that's why you have to look for those moments, write them down, kind of keep stock, because, if you're hopeful, and like early on, and you have a couple-year run of just bad news, setback after setback, you're not in remission, your biomarkers are up, you lost, I mean, it gets very hard to remain hopeful. So you always have to be present in the little things you can do to drive that hope forward. And I remember the first time after, months of hospitalization and illness and not being able to do a darn thing. And I could make Stephanie toast one day. I could make her toast from my little kind of walker wheelchair thing. And that was a big day for me. That really, I was so hopeful that morning that I could do that before she would go to school. And I achieved that little small goal. And that seed of hope just like bursted in my heart, that I was so proud that I could do that for my daughter. And, that was a high. Here it is, 25 years later or 23 years later that I'm still talking about. Like, that's the imprint of hope. So it's the little things too. Give yourself the credit, man, for sure.
It's awesome. Yeah. 25 years later and you're still talking about toast.
Yeah.
Right. That's a pretty
toast.
Yeah. But that's a pretty remarkable thing. You've accomplished so much in your career, in your life. You've gone all around the world, and 25 years later, you're still talking about toast.
Yeah. It was a hopeful, joyful moment. And,
that's right.
And everybody needs to focus on those little things,
right.
and be proud of them. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why this book is really important. I think for everybody, because it's not these unreachable. You have such an incredible career, an incredible story, but your book is not this unreachable, unfathomable thing.
No.
It's real and it's authentic and it's relatable and it's for every person. It's literally written so everybody can read it, which is really remarkable.
Well, like I said, I write like I talk. So is it the best piece of literature? Probably not. But is it relatable? And here's another thing that I think that we tried to do, thinking about myself and working with Greta, is that I am acutely aware of the times that I've had cognitive setbacks with my MS. And it's not just MS, a whole host of rare, chronic, and terminal. Just some of the medications alone, short-term memory loss, cognition problems, thinking challenges, fatigue alone can change the processing, the neurotransmitters. And so I also wanted the book to be easy, right? I don't want to sit down and, occasionally, yes, I will take out a fantastic piece of, intellectual literature and be like, okay, I'm going to tackle this book and go to a book club and go super philosophical and really deep. But this was not the book to do that with. This was a book to say, because you're tired, because you're sick, because you're scared, because you're overwhelmed, read this. It's easy. There'll be moments that make you laugh and cry, and hopefully a few nuggets that help you live the life you deserve, because every damn person with a chronic condition and their families deserve the absolute best. 100%. That is my because I go back to a very simple principle. You are more than your illness. It should not define your psyche, your body. You are deserving of goodness and joy, and most importantly, love. And it's worth your time and your effort to ensure that those basic needs are met, because that is what defines us as humans, being able to feel in this capacity.
And that's what this book does above the internet, right? You can't go on Google and get the same information that you can. And it's because you have chosen to be authentic, to be honest, to take your time and
drop a few F-bombs. But I did today. Aren't we proud of me?
I am very proud of you. It's not over yet, though. We still have time, my friends. Well, I can tell you that you have given back in ways that you'll never know. It's just true. You've created not only this opportunity for patients and caregivers around the world to share their stories and to find peace in that, but you've given thousands of people the opportunity to make their livings off of providing those opportunities to others as well, which is impactful, of course, for my life and my family, but for my existence on this earth and what you have done up to this point. And then, of course, so beautifully within this book has given endless amounts of people the same opportunities that I have been blessed to have from you.
Well, thank you very much.
And I have to just say one thing that you wrote. I'm going to just, again.
Okay. I don't know what's coming, but
I keep saying.
Okay, go for it.
One thing that you wrote that really, it's just one of those little 3-sentence pieces that you put in there that really just, it just impacted me substantially. You wrote, "Life doesn't stop with your diagnosis. It transforms, and it can transform into something beautiful."
Yeah.
What you're telling us is you don't just survive in the face of tragedy. You show us how to thrive in more ways than anyone could ever expect or understand. And this is not based on what you have done in your career or financially. This is based on the ways that you've been able to find love, acceptance, the way that you have provided service, humility, and honesty. And it brings a lightness to people in the form of hope. in the form of acceptance, in the form of love. And maybe biggest of all, you have made your story part of our story. And that's the biggest gift you could ever give. So thank you, Brenda, for showing up today. Thank you for showing us that life is beautiful and for all the possibilities we have in this world, no matter what we're given. Your book is a true gift to the rest of the world. And I am very grateful to know you personally. And I'm very, very grateful for you taking some time for us today. So thank you.
Anytime. Oh, boy, you brought me to tears, but not totally unusual, but very beautiful. Thank you. And to everybody and the patient worthy, family and what next, or anybody else that watches this, do remember that, you might feel alone at times, but you are not alone, and you are worth having a beautiful, rich life in whatever way, that works for you and your family. So just remember you deserve it. And it was my absolute great pleasure to spend my time and my thoughts with you today. And I'm humbled, and I'm sending everybody so much love. I'm bursting here. I'm bursting with love for everybody, and my cup is beyond full. So thank you, and mwah.
Thank you so much for listening to Wait, How Do You Spell That? A Rare Disease podcast. For more information about Brenda's book, Diagnosed, The Essential Guide to Navigating the Patient's Journey, and for a link to find it on Amazon, please see the show notes below. And for more episodes of Wait, How Do You Spell That? Please go to our website at www.patientworthy.com. Thank you.